Hey guys, so we got a quite complicated question today, so I'm going to break it down into little chunks. So here we go. Clive Hamilton has asked, excuse me Tick, the agenda I want answered is this: I worry about the past because I believe it is about pattern recognition so that you can interpret the future. I'm going to just break for a second there. So, yes, there's that famous phrase, if you do not learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And the other one, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So there is patterns that we can see in history and we can learn from that. What we can't do though is predict the future, and so we can be prepared but we can't be certain of what's going to happen. There is no law in history, but we can see patterns. So for example, we can see that, you know, every time the states or whatever print currency, and we've got the fractional reserve banking system, and that inflates the currency supply, we know that that makes a bubble in the capital goods industries, which then eventually, you know, well, over time it squeezes the consumer, and then eventually that pops. The consumer receives a lot of happy days, let's put it that way, and those who are working in the capital goods industry find themselves unemployed. We know this happens. It's called a recession, depression. We know this happens every single time. So we know that when the states or the banks are printing money, or printing currency to be more exact, we know there's going to be a recession. So we can see that, we see a pattern recognition. What we can't do is predict when it's going to happen, or how severe it's going to be, or how many million of people are going to be unemployed. We just know there's going to be a recession, it's just a question of time. So unless there's some sort of something we didn't see came in and somehow managed to cure the bubble, which I don't think will ever happen. But yes, that's we can predict that there's going to be something because we can see the pattern recognition. Oh, this is what causes this, right? But what we can't do is predict the future and say when it's going to happen, how bad it's going to be, so on and so forth. You've got to be careful not to try and be like, well, we've had 2 world wars, there must be a third. There's nothing to say that there's going to be a third world war, because there's nothing to... I mean, it's likely, but it's not necessarily going to happen. Because you can't predict the future, that sort of thing. What worries me is this constant theme of technology causing chaotic surprises. Can you start at the very beginning of World War II and the Battle of France? Was it reasonable for the French to have missed that tanks can travel through woods? Remembering this mistake caused the fall of a nation. Well, I'm just going to read Afflicted's answer to this because I think it was actually pretty good. He says, I can answer at least your first question. Did the French really overlook the fact that tanks can drive through woods? Yes and no. They knew that the Germans could make it through, but they dramatically overestimated how long it would take. They figured that if Germany tried, they would have enough time to advance to head the Germans off and dig in. I believe, and I'm not entirely sure about the exact numbers, but the French thought it would take no less than 10 days to get through the Ardennes, but Germany did it in about 2 days. See, with the benefit of hindsight, we can say, well, that was a stupid thing. You know, they should have put more troops in the area or whatever. The problem is that hindsight is 2020. Being there at the time, it's not. So if you imagine being a Frenchman in 1939 or 40 or whatever, you know, French general, French soldier, it doesn't really matter. The point is, what are you looking back on? You're looking back on the First World War, you're looking back on all the old battles before that. You've not really got much to go on. The tank had only just been invented, 1916-ish. And so you don't have anything to look back on except for trench warfare, because World War I was a turning point in terms of warfare, in terms of people just didn't expect it to be the way it was. You can see this in the literature. Everyone's like, wow, this is not something we expected, right? Because most wars didn't end up in trench warfare to the same extent as it was in the West, on the Western Front. So when you think about the tanks, you know, or the tank, I mean, yeah, there were some tanks in the Spanish Civil War, but not very many, and it wasn't on the scale of what happened to the Battle of France. The biggest tank battles prior to this point were in France again, or Belgium or whatever, in the First World War. So the only thing you have to go on is how the tanks performed at the Somme or, all the other battles. So if tanks can only go a few miles or whatever during the First World War, and they're very slow and they go at the speed of the infantry, so on and so forth, then why would you not think, why would you suddenly look ahead and go, well, of course the tank's going to be much faster in 1940? You wouldn't think that. Yes, you did see Poland, but even, I've mentioned this before, even the Poles and the Germans didn't use a blitzkrieg in that sort of sense in Poland. And so it wasn't really a lesson that the French could learn, or if they did, it was too late to learn it, sort of thing. So yeah, it is reasonable that the French could have missed that tanks could go through the woods, because they just, even if the woods weren't there, would they have really thought, oh, these tanks could go so many miles, 30 mile an hour or whatever, and get to the French coast? They probably wouldn't have thought that. They probably would have thought, they can only go a few miles, so if they attack in this direction, we know we've got time to react. And you see that in the literature. I forget the name of the general. One of the top generals in the French army, after the couple of days at the Battle of Sedan, once the Germans had broken through, literally 2 days into the campaign, as Afflicted said, he starts crying. He's like, we've lost the battle. He knows they've lost. They have nothing left. They have practically nothing left in the area. They've got no reserves or very little reserves. All their troops had gone into Belgium, etc. So they were caught completely off guard, and they hadn't realised that tanks could go quicker than what they had witnessed in the First World War. So yes, it is reasonable that they could have missed that, and it did cause the fall of the nation. But could they have recognised this? I don't think so. I think we're looking back in hindsight and seeing it, but at the time they probably couldn't recognise that. So then you say, do you think this has echoes in the modern arena, such as cyber warfare or AI or drones or space, etc.? Well, I can see similarities, definitely. However, what you have to remember is that the tank did not win World War II alone, or Battle of France alone. And what you also have to remember is that no matter how advanced the weaponry gets, you still need boots on the ground, right? One guy that my dad used to know used to say, no matter what happens, there's always ends up with some guy throwing, two guys throwing bricks at each other. That's what happens in warfare. Modern infantry go in with knives. Why? Because, it's not like, we just invented this cool new weapon. No, it's because, why would you go in with guns and then have a knife? It doesn't make any sense. Well, the reason why is because when you get to so close, having weapons that fire so far away aren't possibly as effective as maybe a knife would be. And so you're always going to have those guys on the ground. Now, does cyber warfare help in that? Yeah, absolutely. AI, I think they're going way too far with it. I don't think they quite realise what it will do and what it is. Everyone always says, you look, again, history repeats or rhymes. Oh, machines, they will take our jobs. They've been saying this for 200 years, right? The pin makers that Adam Smith pointed out are still unemployed to this day because of the pin machines. No, they got different jobs, right? When the AI comes, everyone's like, whoa, I'm just going to sit back and relax. You won't, because if you let's say everybody has a machine next to them, right? If I had a machine doing this, the machine will be editing the video, but I'll still be making the video. I'll still be doing work, because if I do more work than the AI, let's say the AI does everything 10 times faster than I am. Well, if I work a little bit as well or whatever, then I have higher living standards because I'm producing more than the AI is, and thus I'm receiving the benefits of me producing more. So it makes sense to keep producing. And so AI is not going to wipe all jobs. We're just going to sit back and relax, because those who still carry on working are going to have a better living standard than those that don't. And people think this beyond it. But in terms of warfare, again, you're still going to have a guy on the ground. Even if the AI is super amazing AI and actually can think as fast as a human or better than a human or whatever, you're still going to have guys on the ground, because it makes sense. Even if you had 1 million AI, if you're an extra guy on the ground, then you're going to have the advantage, or you're going to give more advantage to your side, even if you're not as efficient as the AI is. So it makes sense to have humans on the ground as well. And again, it always comes down to two guys throwing a brick at each other. So make sure, if you're watching this, anyone who's programming AI to fight in the army, make sure you program them to recognize what a brick is and then be able to throw it. Say about drones, well, we've got drones anyway. I mean, yeah, it changes the dynamics of the battlefield. It doesn't change the battlefield. The battlefield still ends up as the same. Space, well, space is just basically, I don't know, submarines, submarine warfare. Did that change anything? Yes, technically it does. But it didn't win the war alone, or maybe arguably it didn't. So, yeah. Can you see any similarities where a conventionally so-called weaker ideology, which they are in my view, can suddenly overpower democracy and it's game over in the world? Okay, I don't think you're going to like my answer here, but I'm going to give it anyway. So, the American Constitution makes it very clear that America is a republic. It is not a democracy. You will not find the word democracy in the Constitution, as far as I'm aware. And the reason why is because the Founding Fathers knew that democracy was bad. Socrates, one of the greatest Western thinkers, whether you like him or not is irrelevant, he was forced to commit suicide because of a democratic majority. And yes, juries are democracies, and yes, they are silly. If you think about it, it's like, I've not been to jury duty, but I know people who have, and they've said it was ridiculous. We went there, and people who were annoyed that they had to attend this judiciary, these guys just wanted to condemn whoever was in the box. Why? Because, if I'm going all this way, I'm going to make sure that they get condemned. So it's like, why are people who are innocent being arrested and thrown in a, kidnapped and thrown in a cage? The reason why is because democracy doesn't work. That's the reason why. And so what we need is not democracy, we actually need republic. So I'm going to replace your word with republic and go from there. So what we call weaker ideologies, so democracy, socialism, these are weaker ideologies if you look back in history. The book Socialism, The Idea That Never Dies, makes it very clear. Prior to, let's say, the 1700s, the average living age for a human being was less than 30, right? So I'm old. I'm old now that I'm 32. And then capitalism happened. Boom. What's the living age now in Britain? It's something like 70 or 80, something like that. And that's the average. So, yeah, you can see, oh, look, capitalism works. And socialism in the 20th century, not got a very good record. And yet, people continue to democratically vote in socialist leaders, like in Venezuela. So democracy and socialism, because they are weaker ideologies, and they will lead to ruin, but they can definitely overthrow a republic, especially when we forget what the actual terms mean, or if we cannot define them because we refuse to accept the real definition of these terms. Well, democracy and socialism, there's no definition of them, but whatever they are, they ruin the world. And so, yeah, it is game over the modern world if those weaker ideologies do take over. Can you see any similarities where a conventionally so-called weaker ideology can suddenly overpower democracy? It's happening, or it potentially is happening, and what we need to do is wake people up to it. And that seems to be happening at the minute, but whether we'll do it in time, I don't know. And yeah, and it's like, this is why I also think me explaining, oh, by the way, socialism is state control of the economy, in which case that obviously means that fascism and National Socialism is state control of the economy. Me saying that is like a wake-up call to some people. It was a wake-up call to me because I didn't realise it until I looked into the Holocaust. When I looked into the Holocaust, I was like, of course it's socialism. Why didn't I see this before? And so, people are starting to, people in the comment section of my videos, a lot of them hate me. Some are starting to realise, oh yeah, no, he's right. If you watch the public versus private video, you'll see that. We can see it because mass ignorance will lead to weaker ideologies overpowering the Western world. It will happen. I noticed, for example, you talk about combined warfare in tanks, but surely this is a communication issue with the Germans. Went from perfect comms to intercepted comms, so they go from 100 to minus 100, a total flip. This kind of reversal doesn't happen in Stone Age hand-to-hand combat. Okay, a couple of things here. The Germans still had combined arms warfare in the late war. The problem is that they ran out of infantry, essentially, or they ran out they needed more infantry, and they were focused so much on the tanks rather than the the coordination between the different arms. And the enemies of Germany got a lot better. The Soviets got better at warfare, Britain and America, etc., got better at warfare, so they weren't able to have the advantage that the Germans had in the early war, where they did combine and they were the only power to really do so. By the late war, it was too late for them. And they still had communication, they could have still done it, but then by the time they get to the late war, most of the German soldiers and whatever, they're not these veterans that we imagine them to be, or what the Variables will give us. Yeah, there were a lot of veterans, but there were also a lot of newbies and a lot of young men and old guys with bicycles, etc. You did have that. I mean, these guys were veterans from the First World War, so they weren't like pushovers, but they were still these old guys with a rifle and a bike, you know. They couldn't coordinate their arms as effectively, so it's not just a communication issue, it was also the fact that, you know, I mean, World War I guys don't really have much practice with a tank, especially on the German side. But you say it doesn't happen with Stone Age and hand-to-hand combat weapons. Well, it does. If you look at a Bronze Age weapon and shield, let's say, and you convert into an Iron Age weapon and shield, boom, the Bronze Age guy is going to have a real tough time. You know, it does happen. It just doesn't happen all the time. The chariots went away when people started using horse a bit differently. So you do have it. It just happens less often. We are moving in a, again, capitalism, we are moving in such a way, so fast, so rapid compared to what happened before this, that we can't keep pace with it anymore. So we're seeing constant change, whereas before we wouldn't have seen that. And that's why people are scared of capitalism, because they're not used to this. You know, 200 years ago, prior to that, you know, if you, the book as well, I say, Socialism, the Idea That Never Dies, he makes this point. If you took somebody from, let's say, the Stone Age and dumped them in 1600s France, let's say, there wouldn't have been much of a difference. But if you took that guy from the Stone Age or the guy from France and put them in the modern day, well, obviously there's a massive difference. The last 200-300 years has been a complete 180, you know, it's been unreal, the amount of change that's happened in the last 200-300 years. Unreal. The whole of human history up until the last 200 years has been, you know, everybody was a peasant, the end, right? So now it's not quite, I mean, we're still peasants, but it's not quite the same. Peasants who have computers and cameras and microphones and God knows what else, right? So it's completely changed. So it's no wonder people are scared of change, etc., because they're not used to it. I'm finding modern warfare, as studied from World War II, is highly chaotic, and in my opinion, I feel from my agenda, I think that's meant to be perspective, that any other timeline in World War II causes extinction of the species, for example, the Nazis getting the bomb first, etc. Is this over dramatic? Can you do a video on what was reasonable technology thinking at the time as compared to what was really the case, and what lessons can be learned from this? It seems one mistake caused the death of a nation, therefore it's pretty important. With regards to France, it's not just the one mistake, it's numerous mistakes that caused it. That we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Germans going through the Ardennes, you know. So there's a lot of mistakes going on there, and that final one is the nail in the coffin. It wasn't just the one mistake. You know, if they'd had a decent strategic reserve, the Germans would have been in trouble. They might still won, but they would have been in trouble. If the French had attacked, or the British had attacked as well, in 1939, when the Germans were going into Poland, the Germans would have been screwed. So it's several different, or numerous different mistakes, and this one happened to be the last one. So yeah, but would the Germans have got the bomb? Probably not. I don't agree with that. I think the Allies would have got there first. Any other timeline causes extinction of the species? No, because The Americans only had 2 bombs in World War II, and, well, I know it's the end. And it took till middle of 1945 before they got them. And they only used them on Japan, and it's not like they had an overabundance of bombs. They only had like 2, and I don't even think they had a third. Or if they did, I might be wrong. I'm not sure. I need to do more videos on the bomb. That would be cool. But a nuclear bomb, you know, even in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, didn't kill everybody. There was still a lot of survivors. So yeah, it would have been bad for the species. Let's say it wouldn't have been extinction. It probably would have brought us back a couple of 100 years though. But they weren't going to have enough bombs at that stage, even if the war had gone on a couple more years. They wouldn't have had enough bombs at that stage to do complete damage. And I think as well, you know, if you nuke Berlin, I think the Germans would have given in at that point. So it's important. This is the thing as well. You can't interpret the future in sense of you can't predict it. It's also really hard when there's an alternative timeline. You can only go so far with it. You can only say, well, if this had happened, maybe this would have. So if America had used the bomb on Germany, would it have changed? Well, obviously they would have had to develop it a lot earlier. You know, it starts changing. You can't really do it. This is why I'm very reluctant to do videos where it's alternate history. It's very, very, you can't do it. You can sort of go, well, this would have been a better option because blah, 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 blah. You can do that, but you can't, you know, some people have asked me, oh, what happens if, you know, they made a different decision in 1940? Like, you can't predict it. You just can't predict because it's not the future. It's a different alternative timeline. One of the videos I saw, we changed something in the past, like a millennia ago, and now the Roman Empire is still here. It's like, it wouldn't have been. No, stop. You know, it's not possible. So I'm going to leave it there. Very complicated question. What do you guys think? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.